Hello everyone, it's CJ Miller from Through These Four Eyes. Today I'm taking you on a personal journey down memory lane to rediscover my childhood. So, why don't you join me and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Come on, step this way. We're here in the Banks, an area of Bay City's west side where my parents grew up just about a block apart. I actually grew up in Bridgeport, but I would spend every summer here visiting my grandparents. Bay City was just more fun in my opinion, and provided a lot more for a kid to do. We're standing outside my maternal grandparents, Joe and Madge Conley's former house on Mashon Street. This is where my mom Debbie and my Aunt Midge grew up. My grandpa Conley worked across the river at GM and would often walk to work with his lunch pail and thermos in hand. My grandma Conley worked for a time in the Shearer building downtown, if I remember correctly. They were the sweetest, most kindly couple I knew, and I loved them dearly. I have fond memories of my summers here, including riding my bike up and down these neighborhoods, shopping the sidewalk sales downtown in the late 70s and early 80s with them and my mom, and picking raspberries in my grandpa's garden and eating them right off the bushes. Just down the street on Patterson is the former home of my paternal grandparents, Carl and Phyllis Miller. This is where my dad Gary and my uncle Randy grew up. My grandma Phyllis was a stay-at-home mom, and my grandpa Carl was a train conductor for the Pierre Marquette Depot. I grew up listening to my dad's stories about him and his personal adventures on the tracks from Bay City to Mackinac. My mom and dad, despite having grown up only a block apart, never really crossed paths. They knew of each other, but that was about it until one fateful day. As the story goes, if memory serves me correctly, is that my mom took a job selling Avon. She was going door to door and ended up at my dad's house. My grandma Miller somehow convinced her to meet and later go out with my dad. Begrudgingly, in order to make a sale, my mom agreed. The rest, as they say, is history. Interesting tidbit. The White House next to my grandma and grandpa Miller's house belonged to Jack and Betty Haverkamp and was the original location of Jack's bicycle shop. Jack and Betty were longtime friends of my grandparents. Now, their grandson resides there. Next on my trip is Fire Station number 5 on Smith Street. Only a few blocks from where my parents grew up, I'd often ride my bike down here to play in the playground with friends. I would trade comics and have awesome imaginary adventures. Also, every Halloween my mom would take me here to have my candy x-rayed after a long night of trick-or-treating. Visitation Church was where my family worshiped for years. It was the place where both my grandfathers had the funeral services. I remember being a pallbearer at my grandpa Miller's funeral and having to carry his casket down those long steps and into a hearse. When my grandma and grandpa Conley finally decided to sell their home in the Banks, they moved to Essexville. Here at Pine View Apartments on Pine Street, I continued my tradition of visiting them throughout the summer. It's here that I have the fondest memories. I was a burgeoning teenager by then and was given the freedom to explore. This is the original location of the Hampton movie theaters. There were 2 theaters here and a small concession stand. For $3 you could see a movie and get popcorn and a pop. I spent a lot of time here. Eventually they decided to open a bigger theater just down the parking lot called the Hampton 6. That's why I spent even more time. Later in life, I would even take my kids here to see a movie. I took my son Brandon to see the first Harry Potter here in 2001, and my son Kyle to see the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man in 2002. Then there's this place, Hampton Town Center. As a kid growing up in the 80s, the malls were the place to be, and this mall was no exception. I became a mall rat here. I would come out the back of my grandparents' apartment building and walk across the parking lot to go into the back. It was the main rear entrance I'd always go into because that's where all my favorite stores were. I'd browse taboo adult novels at B. Dalton's, pick up the latest tapes by my favorite hair metal bands at Tape World and later CDs at Camelot, and munch on a pretzel with melted cheese at Hot Sam's while hanging out by the fountain at Center Court. This was my mall. Many years later, I'd come back here where I spent so much time to begin a new chapter in my life. I got married here in the Dreams Come True wedding chapel to my wife Leslie in 1996. To me, it was very serendipitous that the place where I had such fond memories would be the same location where I'd start new ones. Last, we're here at Carroll Park, not far from my grandparents' apartment building. I remember going here with them in the summer to feed bread to the birds and play. There used to be a bird enclosure on the other side of the pond where they would keep ducks and geese. I'd feed them through the fencing while talking to my grandma. We'd sit and just talk and enjoy each other's company. I do most of the talking though, as she just sat there and listened, offering sagely advice when needed. Well, that's it. Thank you for coming along with me on this personal trip down memory lane. It's been fun for me, and I hope it's brought back some memories for you as well. Until next time, remember that everyone's journey started somewhere. Never forget your past, because that's what helped shape you into the person you are today. Thank you to our sponsor, Best Choice Pizza of Cucullin. Hometown, handmade, gourmet pizza.